I'm going to hit you with a popular debate over the last few decades. And, you're very well read. You're pretty well read in patristics and some of these historical discussions. I pretty much just do one thing. I just do biblical studies. So you could probably help me out here. But it is the argument around the eternal subordination of the Son, the ESS debate. This debate's been around for a long time, very, very long time, but it kind of got a resurgence in the last several decades because of questions around female submission to men, hierarchy. So there's the question around how human relationships might reflect relationships within the Trinity, specifically Father and Son. So for those that are viewing and listening that are unfamiliar with this debate, what is the debate? Because there's very, very strong feelings on both sides of this debate. What is the debate? Maybe just name a quick couple of biblical texts that relate to it that might, point to either side. Who are kind of key proponents? And then what's your take on this? Because I know that you've spoken into this. You may have even edited a book. I don't remember. You may have edited a book. You've edited a lot of books. But just give me a little bit about this subject.
Okay, let's take a couple of minutes, but let me back up and explain. So the idea was, and this came out initially in the late 70s, that Adam and Eve are in the image of God. Okay, so they're there, and within the Godhead there is submission because the Son submits to the Father. Okay, so you certainly see that submission and that obedience in the incarnation. And the idea is that subordination and that submission is eternal. Okay, so the Son eternally submits or is subordinate to the Father. Now, the way that plays out, if man and woman are in the image of God, then the wife submits to the husband in an analogous way to the Son submits to the Father. So you can have a kind of equality of being, but a subordinate relationship. And so this idea of the eternal functional subordination of the Son is then mirrored in the marriage relationship. And look, you can go through the New Testament, certain parts of, the Gospel of John, where Jesus says, the Father is greater than I only do the will of my Father. Or at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, when the Son hands the kingdom over to the Father. Passages which do have a kind of subordinationist vibe to it. So that's one issue. But then what they want to do is make that the basis of husband-wife relationships. Now, on the one hand, when I first got into this, I thought, okay, you can't deny the fact that there is a kind of, the Son's messianic obedience. He certainly submits to the Father. And what happens in his earthly life is, to some degree, reflective of their eternal relationship. There's a distinction of persons going on that does reflect in the father-son relationship. But I also said, once you start using the word subordination, you are kind of floating with like Arianism, because Arianism, a 4th century heresy, was all about the Son is subordinate and inferior to God the Father. Now let's call them the EFS proponents. They were not saying the Son is an inferior being. They were saying he's just subordinate in role, which you can kind of understand how they get to. But then they wanted to, make that very programmatic. And I thought when they said subordination, they didn't really mean it in the full sense. So I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt of it. The bigger problem is they wanted to apply this to the marriage relationship, which I thought was a bit weird, because unless your marriage has got a father, son, and a eunuch, I don't know how that's going to really, really apply. That kind of a thing. But then it became apparent to me that when they were using the language of subordination, it wasn't an imprecise, clunky term. They actually meant it, because one scholar, Bruce Ware, was arguing that the Father gets a greater glory than the Son, and he's worthy of more devotion. It was really weird, and that's when I had to pivot and think, okay, actually, this isn't kind of flirting with a bit of Arianism. This is full-on semi-Arianism, okay? And that's when I took on a more critical disposition towards it. And I teamed up with a number of people, and when we did some things in print and on the internet, and it really became challenged, I think, in about 2000, was it 12, 15, 14, 15 maybe. And it was really led by Amy Bird, who really declared war on this, and there was nothing but debris and death in her wake after she got people to dig into this. Because the big problem with EFS is they were saying not merely is the Son obedient during his earthly life, but he is always obedient and somewhat in some way inferior to the Father eternally. And they were denying things like the eternal the eternal generation of the Son. And that was very, very problematic. And the language they used sounded like a group of semi-Arians in the 4th century. And thankfully, I think EFS has now been cast to the side as an aberration, and certain groups are no longer using that as an analog in the Trinity for their view of male-female relationships.
So it sounds like you're saying some sense of deference of Jesus to the Father, certainly in his earthly ministry, perhaps in general. But you're kind of hesitant to call it a kind of total submission or total subordination, because it implies inferiority. Is that what you would say?
Exactly right. And that was the position that the early church arrived at. They said the difference between the Father and Son is not subordination. The difference between Father and Son and Spirit is relations of origin. The Father is unbegotten, the Son is eternally begotten, and the Spirit is eternally proceeding. That's how you differentiate the Father and the Son, not a power authority differentiation. And that was what was discussed in the 4th century, which is why the EFS position becomes very close, not to pure Arianism, but to a semi-Arianism position.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Do you remember the name of your book if people want to follow up the edited volume?
I think we did the volume was called Trinity Without Hierarchy.
There you go. So if you're watching, you want to read more. Yeah, if you want to read more, check out Trinity Without Hierarchy to catch up on the conversation. Thank you so much.